essentially a psychohistorian. I try to figure out the motivations of historical characters, not just of Hannibal and of the Roman commanders that he faced, but also of the historians that wrote the story, particularly Polybius and Livy, or Titus Livius. See, those are the two main sources that we have. The story of Hannibal is contained in the writings of Polybius and Livy. But if you look at Polybius, you can see that the reason he's writing is to explain to his Greek countrymen why the Romans were so successful and taken over the Mediterranean world. Now, Polybius was a close friend of Scipio Emiliano, who was the commander that led the destruction of Carthage in the year 146 BC. And he was employed by the Emilian family. So anytime he writes about Scipio or the Emilian family, you have to wonder whether he is actually completely objective, or whether he is beautifying some things in order to please his friend and his employers. And the other main source, Titus Livius, or Livy, he is essentially writing to instill patriotism in the youth of the age of Augustus, or Octavian. So he is making the Roman acts more admirable in his writing. And he also allows himself to invent all kinds of episodes and speeches which obviously he could not have witnessed and for which there is no other source. So we have to take that with a grain of salt. For example, he will tell us what Hannibal said to his soldiers. Well, he doesn't know. He just figured out what he might have said, and he composed a speech. Now, both Polybius and Livy use some earlier sources, for example, Silenus, but they're lost. So we have no way of reading the earlier sources to see to what extent Polybius and Livy followed them and to which extent they changed them or modified them. There is a story that Polybius tells and Livy repeats, that Hannibal, as a small child, when he was 9 years old, swore on an altar to be the eternal enemy of Rome. Actually, Polybius doesn't say that. Polybius says he swore to never be a subject of Rome, never be a friend of Rome. But Livy changes that into always hating Rome. And all kinds of authors and authorities have picked this up, and they have tried to make the hatred of Rome on the part of Hannibal as the main reason for his actions. And I think that is totally wrong. I don't believe that Hannibal hated the Romans. I believe that he opposed the colonialism, the imperialism, the incipient imperialism of the Romans. But he did not hate them as a people. This whole story of his childhood oath of hatred is an invention. It's a fiction created in part by Livy. Livy changed his account later and went back to the way Polybius described it, that he had said he would not be a subject or a friend of the Romans, not that he said he would be an eternal enemy of the Romans or would hate them forever. But meanwhile, every book you read almost today says, well, Hannibal was motivated by terrible hatred of the Romans. That is not the case. I think that is completely wrong. So Hannibal's objective was never the destruction of Rome. He didn't intend to destroy Rome. What he intended was to stop the spread of the imperialism of the Romans and restrict the Romans to the center of the Italian peninsula. So he came to liberate the other Italian people from the yoke of the Romans, and including the people at the south of Italy, which were from Greek colonies originally. He did not intend to march on Rome and destroy Rome. It was never his plan. So he wanted to break up the alliance of Italian people with the Romans, and so that Rome would be isolated from them. And then Rome would have to agree to some boundary that would not allow them to continue to expand. And that was actually his basic objective. Now, I could talk for many hours about all kinds of aspects of the of the strategy of Hannibal, but I want to concentrate on the Battle of Cannae, which is the most amazing battle in history, in my opinion, the most incredible victory, because that's essentially what brings us here together. That's what brings me to Barletta, to this area. Now, there are several questions that have come up in research that are different from the way the battle is usually told or narrated. The first question is, who was really in charge of the Roman army? See, the traditional account says that there were two consuls, Aemilius Paulus and Terentius Varro, and they alternated command. Each was the commander on a different day. And that on the day of the battle, it was Varro who was in control. And Aemilius Paulus didn't want a battle. He was very cautious, but Varro was very imprudent, and he wanted definitely to fight. Well, that obviously is not so. When Rome created this super army with 80,000 infantry and, as we will see, more than the 6,000 cavalry that usually is there, they didn't create this army in order for them to just continue the strategy of Fabius Maximus of just shadowing Hannibal. They created this army to destroy Hannibal, to confront him and destroy him. So it's reasonable to assume that both consuls wanted a battle, not just Varro. And the place where the battle would take place, this area in here, was actually ideal for the Romans. It is said that it was a mistake of Varro to opt for a plain because Hannibal's cavalry would be able to maneuver. But as we will see in a moment, there is evidence that the cavalry of the Romans was a lot larger than was reported in most books. So the Romans didn't worry about the cavalry of Hannibal because they had a cavalry that was just as good and as numerous. So Varro didn't make a mistake if he was in command. But since Aemilius Paulus was on the right side of the Roman army, commanding the equites or the Roman cavalry, that was the place usually assigned to the consul in command. See, Varro was in command of the Italian cavalry. There is no way the consul in command of the battle would have been placed on the side of the secondary cavalry. All the evidence suggests that it was Aemilius Paulus and not Varro who was in command. And to make things more obvious, Aemilius Paulus is wounded and he is injured and he has an opportunity to escape, but he chooses not to. It's like a captain that goes down with his ship, or like one of those Japanese generals that will commit seppuku when he has lost the battle. If Varro was in command, there is no reason for Aemilius Paulus to accept death. But if he was in command, he felt guilty. Varro escapes, and he's accepted with open arms in Rome. And not only that, but later he's given military command. There is no way, if he was responsible for this disaster, that they would have accepted him with open arms and later given him additional military command. Of course, the reason why Polybius attributes to Varro the command is because Aemilius Paulus belongs to the Aemilian family, the family that employed him, the family that was his friend. So to protect the reputation of Aemilius Paulus, the blame of the battle is shifted to Varro. Now, that's one point. A different point is the size of the cavalry. See, according to Polybius, the Roman cavalry consisted of over 6,000. He doesn't say approximately 6,000. He doesn't say about 6,000. He says over 6,000, but he doesn't say how much over. So this is a very open thing. He also says that in situations of emergency, the Romans increased the number of cavalry that accompanied each legion. Instead of having 200 or 250, it became 300. In the time of Polybius, the cavalry contingent was 300 on a legion. If there was an emergency, you would increase it to 400. So how many horsemen accompanied each legion? And the chances are that they're probably between 300 and 400, not 200 or 250. If you put 400, then the Romans had 3,200 of the equites, and since the Italian cavalry was required to be 3 times as numerous, the Italians would have 9,000. So you have 3,000 and 9,000 together, 12,000. Hannibal has only 10,000. But you see, they had to have some excuse for why they were defeated. And the excuse has always been, well, we had superiority in infantry, but Hannibal had a lot of superiority in cavalry. He had 10,000, we only had 6,000. But if you really read carefully, no, the Romans didn't have 6,000, they had 12,000. They had superiority in infantry and in cavalry. And yet Hannibal managed to turn that against them. Another interesting point is that normally a Roman army looked a little bit like this. See, the infantry in the center, cavalry on both sides. But the army that fought at Cannae looked like this instead. See, and everybody says Varro made some strange decision. Instead of having the width of a normal army, he piled the soldiers one behind the other and made a very deep formation. What possessed him? Why would he do that? Well, I say no. He didn't. This didn't come from Varro. This came from Hannibal. See, Hannibal knew that the Roman army was vastly superior in number. So he deployed his army first in a place that would force the Romans to deploy between the hill and the river, the Ofanto River or the Aufidus. And in that space, there is no way they could have deployed this way. They had to deploy this way to have enough place for the cavalry. So he forced Varro, or Aemilius Paulus, whoever was in command, to deploy in a much deeper form than normal, which compacted the army already. Now, if the Romans did have 12,000 cavalry, 9,000 allied cavalry, 3,000 Roman noblemen, and they divided this cavalry in 2 halves, 6,000 on each side, Hannibal would have had a very hard time, very difficult battle. But Hannibal knew the Romans wouldn't do that, because the Roman noblemen, the equites, would not ride right next to the Italian allies. See, they are the noblemen. The Italian allies are second class. So he knew the Romans would put their nobility on one side, only 3,000, and the 9,000 on the other side. So knowing that, he put 6,000 of his heavy cavalry to go against the 3,000 Italian noblemen. So even though the Romans had superiority in number, on the right wing of the Romans, the left wing of the Carthaginians, Hannibal had a 2-to-1 superiority. On the other side, the Romans had 6,000, but Hannibal had Numidian riders. He had 4,000 Numidian riders that could maneuver. See, the specialty of the Numidians was to hit and run, to approach, attack, retreat, move in circles. They could keep the Italian allies busy. They could not advance. Meanwhile, the heavy Gallic and Spanish cavalry on Hannibal's left wing, the Roman right wing, attacked and destroyed the 3,000. 6,000 against 3,000, no contest. So this side is defeated. This side, the cavalry is being kept busy. Then the Carthaginian cavalry goes behind the battlefield and attacks the allies, and then the allies break and run away. The Numidians follow, but not the cavalry of the Gauls and the Spaniards. They attacked the back of the Roman formation. So what doomed the Romans was their hubris, the arrogance of saying that we, the noblemen, are going to ride separate from those Italians. If they had mixed them together, if they had put 6,000 on each side, Hannibal could not have done it. But he knew he wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. And that is really the main thing that doomed him. That's what allowed him to plan to put 6,000 and 4,000 of his cavalry there. Another interesting aspect is that the center of Hannibal's infantry was in a semicircle. He advanced, he put his weakest men in the center. Gauls, who had a tendency to run away if the going got very tough, interspersed with Spanish infantry. But he had arranged them in a semicircle. And the reason for that is when the Roman army approaches and they make contact, only the center makes contact. All the men on the sides, they also want to fight. So they start converging towards the center. So instead of the Roman army staying this way, they started becoming even more compacted towards the center in order to be able to fight, which made the Roman arrangement become even more compacted. And then Hannibal, of course, as his troops gradually retreat, the Romans advance, the Romans think we are winning. These other guys are backing away. So they keep advancing, and now Hannibal's forces start looking like this, like a bag into which the Romans are moving. And then he has 5,000 Libyans on the sides that start pressing from the sides. Now, at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, Hannibal was able to capture 15,000 Romans. And he took their armor, their shields, their swords, their equipment, and he used them to dress his Libyans. So the 10,000 Libyans had the equipment taken from the 15,000 Romans that were captured. So they looked like Romans. So the men attacking from the side were very confusing, because you're a Roman soldier, you're fighting, and all of a sudden you see some other Romans are coming from there. They don't look like the enemy. So the Libyans approaching from the side are able to get very close without resistance. And then the Roman army becomes more compacted, the cavalry is attacking from the back, the front stops retreating, and what's happening is that the whole army becomes immobilized. The only people who can fight are the people at the edges. Even though they have 80,000, most of the 80,000 are inside, and they cannot fight. So even though Hannibal has half the number, he has more because they are all fighting on the sides. The Romans are immobilized, and the ones in the center, they just have to wait their turn to die. They can't fight. Not only that, but they are so compacted that there was not enough space to wield a sword. So if the other man of your own army is too close, how can you fight? So you're just waiting your turn to be killed. It must have been horrifying. Can you imagine being one of the men in the center? Just waiting your turn to be cut down. Also interesting is that, in my opinion, in my belief, Hannibal had no intention to annihilate the Roman army. He was forced to do it by the size of the Roman army. I mean, how can you fight an army of 96,000 with an army of 50,000 unless you can immobilize them? And once you have immobilized that army, what can you do? The people inside are not surrendering. They are all armed. If you don't continue cutting them down, they will fight again. They will redeploy. So the Romans, by creating this super army, forced Hannibal to find a way of immobilizing this army and then cutting it down. See, the battles in those days were not battles of annihilation. There were battles where two armies met, and one army started winning, the other army ran away, and then they made some peace deal. Usually, an army would lose maybe a few thousand. Nothing like the casualties of Cannae. But the size of the Roman army made it impossible to defeat them in any other way. So Hannibal probably was pretty, see, he was a civilized man. He was a cultured man. He was an educated man. He was not some barbarian butcher. He was not rejoicing in the death of so many people. He was probably horrified, but there was no other way. See? So the Romans forced this annihilation strategy by putting together this enormous army and threatening to annihilate Hannibal. So you have to reverse the tables by immobilizing the Roman army. Another interesting point is the difference between Polybius and Livy as to how many people died in that battle. See, Polybius, who is generally regarded as the most trustworthy of the historians, he says 70,000. Livy says about 50,000. That's a big difference. Well, the problem is that Livy is adding the numbers that became official. He's adding only 6,000 for Roman cavalry. If you add the 12,000, you have enough men on the field to have 70,000 killed. The reason why the 70,000 figure is sometimes rejected is because it doesn't add up. There weren't enough men there. See? And that is another proof that the cavalry was larger than reported. Because Polybius reported the correct amount. There were about 70,000 Romans that died there, and about 5,000 Carthaginians, which is an enormous number of people. Notice that the fighting actually probably took maybe 3 hours, 4 hours, And the casualty figures are greater than the people killed in the bombing of Nagasaki. Over 3.5 hours with only swords and spears is completely unheard of in the history of Mediterranean warfare. Until World War I, no battle had any comparable figures. Immediately after Cannae. Even Livy says the fact that he didn't march immediately after Cannae, that's what saved Rome. That's nonsense. First of all, Cannae and Rome are far away. There is no way he could have gotten there in a couple of days. It would have taken weeks. His army needed to be resupplied. He undoubtedly had a lot of injured people. And he never meant to destroy Rome. And he didn't have the size of an army to lay siege to a city with walls. In Spain, it took him 8 months to conquer the city of Saguntum, which was much smaller than Rome. So Hannibal knew if he had to lay siege to Rome, that would take years. Imagine, Rome took 3 years laying siege to Carthage with all their power before they could take it. So Hannibal didn't have the men to park in front of the walls of Rome for 3, 4, 5 years, with all the reinforcements coming from all over Italy and surrounding Hannibal. There was absolutely no way he could march against Rome. He never intended that. Instead, he decided, okay, what we're going to do is defeat the Romans any time we can and break the alliance of the Italian people to Rome. That was his plan. But it wasn't a mistake not to march on Rome. There is no way he could have. It didn't fit his strategy, and he would have won in the long run if Carthage had supported him 100%. But the people at Carthage, the politicians at Carthage, they were concerned with money. The silver mines in Spain. So anytime they send reinforcement, they send them to Spain. No, you need to reinforce your main commander who is winning battles in Italy. No, let's protect the silver mines in Spain. The Carthaginian businessmen and politicians didn't realize that the survival of Carthage was at stake. And by not supporting Hannibal, they doomed Carthage. It was the greed of the politicians, not the failure of Hannibal, that led to the war being lost eventually. The more we study the Battle of Cannae, the more amazing it becomes. Because every single aspect of that battle was carefully planned, and it was orchestrated, it was carried out with precision. The discipline of the forces of Hannibal, the movement of his forces, the everything worked perfectly. This was not a battle that was decided by luck. He didn't just get lucky. He could see this battle before it was fought. Every detail was put in place. His men trusted him and implemented his orders and achieved this incredible victory. Now, there have been many imitators over the years. In recent times, for example, the Schlieffen Plan of Germany in World War I was based on the Battle of Cannae. Of course, Alfred von Schlieffen died before the beginning of World War I. So it was Moltke who actually was in charge. And Moltke was he was worried too much. Instead of doing exactly what Schlieffen wanted, which was to envelop the Roman forces behind Paris and capture the whole thing, he gave fewer men, and they did not reach Paris. They tried to envelop a smaller part of France. And that was not at all like the Battle of Cannae. And of course this led to a disaster, and then you have trench warfare, and an incredible number of people died. If the Schlieffen Plan had been implemented exactly like Schlieffen designed it, based on the Battle of Cannae, World War II would have been over in 3 weeks. Instead it took years. The most recent example is Schwarzkopf, Norman Schwarzkopf. The Gulf I war was based on the Battle of Cannae. Now Saddam Hussein didn't read history, and he was not familiar with Cannae, so he just deployed his forces in a way that Schwarzkopf could see could be enveloped and defeated. And Schwarzkopf writes, my victory is based on Hannibal's Cannae. It continues to be studied in military academies. There is no limit, but it is a perfect battle. No one has ever matched it or excelled it in history. There are many new investigators, researchers, that are exploring Hannibal today. In Tunisia, for example, there is a writer, his name is Abdelaziz Belkhodia, and he has been studying the other big battle, the Battle of Zama. And he has found plenty of evidence indicating that the Battle of Zama did not take place as described at all. And it may have even been a hoax. It never happened. He has just written a book on this. There's all kinds of exciting new findings coming out on the Second Punic War. The more we research it, the more amazing things are being discovered. So it's not like a history has been told and is set and that's just the way it is. Instead, we today have to go through the propaganda and the distortions formed by the classical record and figure out what really happened. It's exciting. It's like the work of a detective or an investigator. For me, it's the passion of my life. I have been researching this for the past 15, 20 years, and I don't see an end to it. I don't see any point where I could say, well, now I understand it completely. The more I explore it, the more new things I discover. It's amazing. This is a book that was published this year in Tunisia. It's by Abdelaziz Belkhodia. It's titled Hannibal Barca, l'histoire véritable et le mensonge de Zama. In other words, Hannibal, the true history and the deception of Zama. Is perhaps the best book on Hannibal in existence today. It gives you the whole prospect and then focuses on that last battle and gives all the evidence that shows that the story that was told was not what really happened. Exciting things like that happening all the time. The first edition of this book appeared in 2011, and this is the latest that appeared just this year. Right now, while we are presenting here, Belkhodia and Mohammed Hassin Fantar, who is the greatest expert in the world on ancient Carthage, are giving a similar talk in Tunisia, celebrating the 2230 anniversary of Cannes. So we're having a simultaneous presentation in Tunisia in Barletta. But this is, if you read French, this book is the best you can pick up. But who knows, in a few years, there will be other things discovered. There is no end to the story.